Welcome to the session on Facets Model of Effective Advertising, Dagmar. Friends, defining advertising goals for measured advertising results is an abbreviated to Dagmar, which was proposed by Russell H. Coney in 1961. Coney suggested that achievement of a hierarchy of communications objectives leads to the actual purchase. He suggested that marketing goals and advertising goals are different. Marketing goals are measured in terms of sales, while advertising goals are measured in terms of the consumer's movement along the hierarchy. The Dagmar model assumes a high involvement learn, feel, do hierarchy. As advertising and marketing goals are deemed distinct, advertising goals can be defined specifically, tracked and measured. With the help of the Dagmar model, the effectiveness of an advertisement can be measured in terms of its ability to move the customer along the hierarchy. The model enabled marketers to define the target market or audience for the commercial. As the advertisement had to be based on the objectives, creative people involved in the process of designing tend to feel that their creativity was being stifled. The implementation of Dagmar is also very costly, as extensive research is required for setting quantitative targets and measuring them. Example, General Motors used the Dagmar approach to identify advertising goals. Let's see what are the objectives. The objectives of the sessions are to explain the Dagmar as an important facet model of effective advertising, to make participants understand approaches to advertising, to identify the operations of Dagmar, to make you aware about the issues and challenges of Dagmar approach, to connect you to the practical implications of Dagmar approach. Let's understand what this Dagmar approach is. Friends, the Dagmar approach of advertising was devised by Mr. Russell Coney. Dagmar is a concept used in advertising to set advertising objectives and goals. Dagmar is an abbreviation for defining advertising goals to measure advertising results. Dagmar is a marketing approach used to measure the results of an advertising campaign. Dagmar is an acronym that stands for defining advertising goals for measured advertising results. It seeks to guide consumers through 5 phases regarding the product: unaware, aware, comprehension, conviction and action, while also setting specific measurable objectives to determine the overall success of the campaign. Russell Coney observed that although people were investing in advertising, they had to invest a lot of time in other marketing activities to get the return on investment of advertising. This is because the return on investment from advertising was unknown. Hence, Russell said that maximum ROI, that is return on investment, could be achieved with the usage of advertising alone. Hence, a company which was thinking of 10 different ways to market its products could check the ROI from advertising when it wanted to study how effective its advertising was. The Dagmar method understands that potential customers are all initially unaware of the product's existence and focuses on leading consumers smoothly through the audience's cycle. The ultimate goal is that the customer purchases the product. The company must identify the target market for the product to make the product effective. The image here talks about purchase prospects. Now let's see stages to Dagmar. According to Dagmar, each purchase prospect goes through 4 steps: awareness, comprehension, conviction and action. These steps are also known as ECA advertising formula. ECA is a descendant of IDA advertising formula and considered to be more popular and comprehensive than IDA. Developed for the measurement of advertising effectiveness, it maps the states of mind that a consumer passes through. Important parts of decision in the Dagmar model are definitions of target audience, that is, people whom the advertising message is addressed to, and objectives, that is, goals of advertising message. The 2 core things on which the Dagmar model stood were: first, that is creation of a communication task to achieve goals, and second is defining the objective of the communication task in a manner that the results can be measured. Let's understand the first one, that is the communication task involved in the Dagmar approach. The communication task is a combination of an advertising activity, a branding activity and possibly a customer service activity. The work of marketing is holistic and hence it has to look at the whole organization. The work of advertising is more individualistic and hence the organization is not considered. To measure that, a task assigned to advertising is later on measured only in advertising terms. Russell Coley designed the communication tasks. Creating a communication task which involves communications between the company and the customer was solely the responsibility of the advertising department. The goal of the communication task in Dagmar is awareness. Communication tasks involved making the consumer aware of the brand or the product. In that, you have to look into comprehension. These tasks also help the consumer in understanding the attributes and the features of the product and what the product will do for the consumer. It also look into conviction, that is, the communication task convinces the customer that this product was meant for them. It also includes action, that is, ultimately after conviction the customer was to be enticed to take action. Friends, in the Dagmar model, the issue does not end at just creating the communication task, because creating this task is very difficult if the objectives of advertising are not known. If you don't know why you are communicating to the customer, then how will you communicate? Thus, Dagmar was also involved defining the objectives for communications. So, second is defining objectives in the Dagmar approach. That is the most important task of Dagmar, also defining the objectives of advertising or of the communication tasks which were to be created. Once you define the objectives, then the measuring of advertising results was also comparatively easier. With this move, Russell Coley also gave more responsibilities to the advertising department. Not only were they responsible for the ads made, they were also responsible for how well they understood the objective of advertising and how they incorporated these objectives in their communication tasks. Now, let us understand objectives of advertising through Dagmar. The objectives of advertising in Dagmar, which are used to create communication tasks, includes: first, concrete and measurable tasks. Friends, the tasks need to be precise statement of what the advertiser wants to achieve through the communication. Does he want to strengthen the brand image, maximize the brand presence, penetrate new markets, or increase overall sales? Second is define the target audience. Friends, before the communication task commences, the target audience needs to be defined as precisely as possible. Are you targeting youngsters, adults, or elders? Any of the various forms of segmentation can be used to define the target audience. Third is degree of change sought. What level of perception, attitude, or awareness of the customer do you want to change? Friends, if a customer is aware of the product, do you want his negative attitude to change to positive? Or if the market is completely unaware, do you want the whole market to be aware or only partially the target group itself? These degrees of change, which are going to be the objective of the communication task, need to be defined in advance. Fourth is the time period. Friends, to achieve the objectives of the communication task, how much time are you ready to allot? If you think that in a month the product can create awareness in the complete market, then you are very wrong. That's why major advertisers try to introduce the product for 3 months and then communicate the features and benefits in the next 3 months, so that the brand recall is high and the brand acceptance is high as well. A defined time period gives better measurability. So, as you could see from above, the Dagmar approach involved defining the objective of a communication task and then creating communication tasks which are themselves measurable. Friends, the Dagmar approach is used by many promotional planners to set plans of advertising and marketing. This approach is also used to set advertising objectives and to measure the results against the plan. Russell Colley's work has led to the improvement of the advertising world because these communication tasks were not only sales driven, they achieved various goals of the organization through advertising. Now, let us understand advertisement effectiveness through Dagmar. Let's take an example. Let us assume that a company ABC want to measure the effectiveness of the marketing campaign for its latest widget. The company starts testing a commercial that is designed to move potential customers through the 4 stages of the purchase process. First, awareness stage. Company makes the consumer aware that there is new widget in the market. Second is a comprehension stage where company shows consumers the new widget's features and reminds the consumer of company's logo and brand name. Third is conviction stage where company helps the consumer emotionally attach to the new widget so that the consumer establishes an emotional preference for the company. And the fourth is action stage where company gets the sale. Friends, company then measures the success of the marketing effort using Dagmar. The company gauges how far the customer proceeded through the 4 stages of the purchase process and how many sales were generated. If the customers get stuck in one for the first 3 stages and the company does not meet sales goals, the company knows it needs to change its ad campaign. Now, let's understand the importance of Dagmar. Friends, the Dagmar method is a long established method of creating effective advertising. The idea behind the method is to communicate rather than sell. Let's see the characteristic of objectives as per Dagmar approach. Colley provided a checklist of different communication tasks which advertising might be expected to perform in leading to ultimate objective of sell. An important element covered in Dagmar approach is a concrete, measurable task. Russell Colley argued that the communication task specified in the objective must be specific and concrete to guide the media and creative specialists in the right direction. The characteristic of advertisement objectives according to Dagmar approach includes: they must be defined specifically and documented. They must be formed keeping in mind specific target audience. They must be attained in a time-bound frame. The objectives must be quantified. They must be measurable for evaluating the effectiveness of advertising. Friends, Dagmar approach led to an improvement over and the earlier approaches of setting of advertising objectives by not only focusing on communication tasks at different stages but also on measurement of such tasks. Now let's see issues and challenges to Dagmar approach. Though Dagmar approach has made significant contributions towards the setting of advertising objectives, yet there are certain areas which have been criticized, thus limiting its universal applicability. The first is response hierarchy. One of the arguments against Dagmar approach is its association with the basic response hierarchy model. Consumers may not always follow the sequence of communication effects as suggested under Dagmar. For example, in case of low involvement products, action may precede attitude formation. Hence, there can be other alternative response models that have been completely ignored by this approach. Second is the sales as objective. Friends, an important argument against Dagmar approach is the neglect sales as objective completely. Dagmar approach emphasizes only communication task as the objective of advertising. As against this, some experts hold the opinion that the only relevant measure of advertising objectives is sales. If an ad cannot generate sales, it is not useful. It's difficult to measure communication effect. Dagmar approach suggests setting of well-defined and measurable advertising objectives and considers communication task as the basic aim of advertising. Setting the communication objective in a measurable form is difficult. Communication effect is difficult to measure and is therefore difficult to be spelled out clearly while it is set. Moreover, communication as an objective may be effective in the short run due to its high recall value. In the long run, it becomes all the more difficult to measure as the consumers might forget it. Fourth, practically and cost aspect. Friends, another objection raised is about the set of difficulties involved in the implementation of Dagmar approach. Colley suggested determining the number of prospective consumers in the hierarchy of communication effects and thereby recommended setting objectives suited to such proportion of target audience at each level of hierarchy. This is not an easy task and calls for extensive market research that may not be feasible and affordable by small firms. Fifth, advertising is not the sole cause for sale. Many factors besides the advertising affect the level of sales. For example, product, price, distribution and other promotion related factors. Now let me conclude the session. Friends, we know that the effectiveness in advertising is very important for the firm. Marketing goals are measured in terms of sales, whereas advertising goals are measured in terms of the customer's movement along the hierarchy. The Dagmar model assumes high involvement learn, feel, do hierarchy. It says that the effectiveness of the advertisement can be measured in terms of its ability to move the customer along the hierarchy. The company gauges how far the customer proceeded through the 4 stages of the purchase process and how many sales were generated. If the customers get stuck in one of the first 3 stages and the company doesn't meet the sales goals, the company knows it needs to change its ad campaign. Friends, in this session, we have learnt meaning, importance, issues and challenges of Dagmar model. Advertisement effectiveness through Dagmar is thus very fruitful. Hope you like the session. Thank you.